Hello. I just finished recording record time, but it feels like this message wants to keep going. And yeah, it just wants to explain it with a little more clarity, I think, and with an illustration. So this is what they're showing me. So they said in record time, if you didn't watch the most recent episode of Record Time, go check that out because this builds on that. But yeah, they were saying in the last ep that guilt and self-acceptance are friends. So, and we can think of guilt as the really dramatic, loud friend, and it's almost like the really popular, bubbly, just loud and dramatic and fun friend who tends to take on all the attention. Guilt loves to be in the spotlight. So, but guilt is best friends with self-acceptance. And self-acceptance, if you can imagine her, she's a little bit more shy. She's got a very subtle energy, but guilt and self-acceptance, even though they're polar opposites, they're like peas in a pod. They go everywhere together. And so imagine this scene. This is what they're showing me. Guilt walks into a party and is hello, I am here, I have arrived. She's wearing this really shiny outfit. You can't miss her, and she's talking so loud that you can't hear anybody else. All you hear is guilt, right? When guilt is there, when guilt is at the party of our psyche, that's the only voice you hear, So it's when guilt is there, she is loud and she is waving her hands and making a big deal. She's telling this long ass story and she exaggerates. She always loves to exaggerate a tale. She makes it really interesting, but you listen to that story because it's really interesting. You can't not tune in and listen to guilt when she's telling a story, because she's she really knows how to make a tiny story feel huge, mountain out of a molehill. That's her game. And so when they arrive at the party, guilt bursts in, and she's the popular one. She goes to all the parties. She always is a notorious party crasher. But when she comes in, she's oh, hey, she's with me. Self-acceptance is with me. So come on. And self-acceptance is oh, I don't know, should I go in? Am I welcome here? Guilt doesn't mind crashing a party without an invitation, but self-acceptance wants the invitation. Even though she's friends with guilt, she's I don't know, guilt didn't have was she allowed to bring a friend? I'm not really sure. So self-acceptance is hanging outside waiting for the invitation to come in, and guilt is inside telling her long story. And what needs to happen in this situation, because guilt without self-acceptance, they are a pair, they go together. Without self-acceptance, guilt gets out of control. And you can think of it she's at this party, she's dancing, she's vibing, she's talking, and unless self-acceptance is there, you can think of her as the DD, right? The designated driver. If she's not there, guilt is gonna maybe have too many drinks and get a little too loud, a little too rowdy. And so she needs self-acceptance to be there to make sure she doesn't get too crazy. And so what we need to do, you can imagine us as the rest of the people at the party. We are observing the party. And so we know, now that you know guilt and self-acceptance go together, anytime you see that guilt has crashed the party, what you need to do is know that self-acceptance is waiting right outside, but she needs an invitation to come in. She's not going to just burst in uninvited like guilt does. So what we need to do is be oh, guilt is getting a little too wild. Let's go get self-acceptance. And so you go and you're looking for self-acceptance, and you just let her know self-acceptance. You see her and you're not stepping outside of the house. You see her in the yard and you're hey, self-acceptance, come on in. And like, what you have to do for self-acceptance to come in, because she's a little shy, you need to clear a path for her. You need to clear a path for her to come into the house, all the way over to where guilt is. And what you need to do is just be like, hey, guilt, like, why don't you sit down? Like, clear some space, right? Guilt, like, get down off the table, guilt. Like, stop dancing on the table, guilt. Why don't you, like, sit down on the couch, have some water, and in that space that you've cleared, right? And because, like, you can imagine, like, this is literally the picture I'm seeing. Guilt is like dancing on a table. She's had too much to drink, and all these people are in a circle around her. Everyone's listening to guilt. But if you take guilt down and you make her sit on the couch, you're like, guilt, you can still be here, but you're gonna get off the table. Everyone clears away, right? Everyone was like packed around that table that guilt was at. But now that guilt isn't dancing anymore, everyone kind of like disperses, and there's so much space. And so what happens is there's plenty of room for self-acceptance to come in and just like spread out. And she's there, and she goes and she tends to guilt, and she knows exactly what to tell guilt to calm her down and be like, hey, you were out of control, girl. Like, it was not that serious. And what self-acceptance does, everyone's like, oh, hey, self-acceptance, did you hear what guilt said? She was telling this crazy story. You gotta hear it. And self-acceptance is like, that didn't happen. She was exaggerating. Here's what actually happened. It's like, yeah, you know, these parts were true, and it was kind of embarrassing, or it was kind of bad. You know, I accidentally hurt someone, you know, that part really did happen. But, you know, all the other stuff, that didn't really happen. And, you know, people were mad, but they forgave us. Guilt was saying that nobody forgave us, that they're still mad, but they're not actually mad at us anymore. Here's the real story. So that's like how we can think about guilt from now on. Now that you know guilt is best friends with self-acceptance, anytime you see guilt, you just know that all you have to do to like get her to settle down is invite in self-acceptance and make room for her. You don't really have to do anything. It's not like you have to carry self-acceptance in. She'll walk in on her own. She just needs space to stand, right? She just needs space. You just have to invite her in, set the intention, the invitation for self-acceptance to come in, and she will come in on her own. Okay, I hope that made sense. This was to me, I thought this was a hilarious way that the Akashic Records illustrated and illuminated guilt. And so I'd love to know what you think. And I know that this is a very lighthearted way of looking at something that can be very heavy and very painful, and something that can even be generational. Generational guilt is real. And my intention here isn't to make light and make a joke out of something that really causes us pain, and not to make a joke out of actual harm that has transpired, but rather to just recognize that a lot of the time guilt gets blown out of proportion, and there is a time and place for it, and there's a time for apologies and corrective action. Absolutely. I'm not saying that that's not the case. We always need to take corrective action and ask for forgiveness when we have caused harm. But we can also remember that we are human and that we make mistakes. Even if we don't mean to, sometimes we cause harm. And in those moments, we can invite in self-acceptance to quiet down the loud voice of guilt. Alrighty, I hope that made sense. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.